But I think if you're going to do a podcast, then you want to tap into that bit because that's where whatever you're doing it for, you're going to be building up that know, like, and trust factor, and that's what's going to keep people coming back and taking those call to actions that you put out on them.
Yeah, it's really hard to fake a podcast. You can,
Yeah, you can't act it.
no, you can't. It's hard to perform, to perform a podcast. Those people get paid to do it. They go through
Yeah.
years and years of schooling to perform that. When really the so much of what you said is just finding the essence and being okay with that essence. And what's interesting, Fiona, is since you had the kind of really an important and tough conversation with that host, the nature of the content has shifted much more of what you recommended.
Wow.
And it's away from what we had thought originally. It set out that this show is, here's what it's going to be about. But as Fiona's talking about, the host, we kind of, after peeling off layers and layers and layers, found that there's this other essence that if that is not coming through in the show, then it's going to be then it's going to seem inauthentic, right? And so it kind of, those things kind of changed the direction of the show, which I think, from a marketer sense, may have reduced the size of what we would call like the audience, right, or the sample audience, but it actually makes it a little bit more. Well, maybe I'll let you speak to that. Why, like, if we're gonna say, there's this larger audience, but our show and our authenticity, our essence, actually for these people, why would someone go after maybe a smaller pond or a smaller audience than going after everybody and more kind of a more general and wider group?
Because I just think you can affect change in a smaller group of people, and then they can affect change. Because this person I know is passionate about, helping people, and it felt like the obvious thing to do when you want to help people is just, I just want to help everybody. And it's like, if you just focus on those that you can help, and then they in turn will help people they know, and then that spreads, and then the whole thing just becomes like more powerful. And also in marketing, niching is a good thing because it helps you talk directly to your audience and tell them why they need what you're doing. And you can talk about what you're doing that helps them specifically, because that will sort of draw them in. When you're starting from scratch with no profile or following, you need to establish yourself, and grow a community, because if you can grow a passionate community for your podcast, then it depends what you're trying to get out of it, but you can use that in multiple ways, to create greater change. Whether that's in events or working with people, there's so many things you can do once you've got an audience. What we're all trying to do really is get a message out to people that care about it.
Yeah, what you said is that you can impact, you have a greater chance of impacting a smaller group of people, I think is the truest thing, out there for, and maybe a big realization that a lot of podcasters have to make, because they say they want to make an impact, but then is that actually equating with what their expectations are? But then, so that's fantastic. I've seen, PR courses, and there's a lot of things which are, get featured on CNBC or whatever these things, these kind of personal brand type, type agencies. And what I've seen is, and I've taken some courses and things like that, and there's a lot of, let's call it, whether it's networking or outreach or emailing or pitching or cold, so a lot of people might be saying, well, yeah, that's nice, but I'm not going to send all those emails, and I'm not going to do whatever. I'm not going to reach out, or I think that what I found is that even if you do all that stuff, if you don't have a good story, if you don't have a worthy enough story or something that someone wants to write about or someone wants to talk about, then all that is for naught. And so I think that there's a bridge, there's some sort of link between kind of what we just talked about, which is having a newsworthy story, a PR worthy story, and then doing the actual, outreach and kind of, emailing or whatever that looks like, which maybe we can get into. But what's the connection that you think between those two that a lot of people miss?
I think it's not owning the truth of it sometimes, which is potentially what what we've got from that conversation, because the truth is always the most interesting thing about us, I think, a lot of the time. So if it's someone that's trying to build their own sort of brand on, say, LinkedIn, like there's a very specific way of doing that. Whereas if you're trying to connect with just people generally on day to day life, then you need to show what you're like generally on day to day life and what led you there. And obviously, not everyone has an interesting story as your client does, and he got an incredible story. So the idea of not wanting to just be like, this is my life, seems crazy to me, because that's what's going to get people interested really, and be like, hold on a minute, who is this guy? I need to see what he's saying.
Let's peel it back a little bit. So we are working on a show right now, and we called in Fiona because she's the PR genius, and we needed to really figure out what is the angle on the show. And it was supposed to be a very kind of corporate-y, almost business entrepreneurial kind of thing. As Fiona's starting to ask these questions, she's really uncovering that his faith and his religion and his kind of whatever spirituality is a huge driver of whatever's going on. And his initial intention was to make it kind of an afterthought with like, oh, I'm going to kind of sprinkle in the spirituality thing and it's going to be more business and stuff. Well, lo and behold, he actually starts recording, and the first time he mentions like God or whatever is like 3 minutes in. And so I think it's just a testament to, and it continued. It didn't stop by there. So he kind of really leaned into it, which is, I think, a testament to asking these questions. And frankly, I think it's a more powerful directed show, and actually a show to where now, if I'm the ideal listener, that show is speaking directly to me. Whereas if we would have gone for the original show, it's very generic. It's very
But
broad.
also, I think, why would you make a show for clients you're already working with anyway? There's literally no point. The whole point is that you work with those clients, and then you make the show for people that can't work for you, or you can't affect on one-to-one level, and that you just have a wider sort of messaging with, really. So that, to me, that just makes much more sense, because then you can build that as a community, and then that podcast starts to become a business in good, hopefully down the line. That's it starts to return on itself, which is not something to be ignored. PR can help build that awareness to bring sponsors or brands, get better guests, get open up doors for you to be on bigger shows, so you can bring in their audience. So then all of a sudden you've got a show that's like bigger than potentially what you're doing your day to day. I mean, that's, a lot of people have that dream as well, but
Right.
that becomes their full-time job.
So what do the mechanics look like of PR? I don't envy most publicists because they have like
It's hard work.
well, they also have incredible, like, it seems like they have vast networks, and they have
Yes.
and people that love and adore them for years, generally. And so
Everyone's your friend.
none of which I qualify for. I don't check any of those boxes. So a couple of things that I'd love for you to do. I'd love for you to kind of talk about some of the mechanics of, if maybe, I know obviously you do this, and you also are starting to coach people on how they can do this. So talk about, like, what are some of the how-tos, and maybe if you could sprinkle in like some of the misconceptions that people have. I'm speaking very caricature-ish about the
Yeah.
industry, because hopefully you can come in and say, well, actually, Hector, you're very wrong. It's actually, here's the truth, and it's actually this way. So is there anything that people are getting wrong about getting PR? And then what do you think people could, like, what steps could people might start taking to get the train kind of going a little bit?
I think, like when you mentioned earlier about those kind of things that say, oh, you can don't pay for a publicist, you can get on here. And I'm like, I'm tempted to take those courses to find out how they sell that, because I know I've been doing this for a long time, and it isn't a simple thing, which is why it's a job, right? So that in itself, I'm just like not quite understanding. Journalists are very, very overworked. You know, there's less and less of them. Your pitch needs to stand out, and it really needs to hit home straight away, which is why you do the work kind of up front, so that when you get the message in front of them, they know who you are, what you're offering, you know, and what the story is that you can give them. So I think the misconception is sometimes that you can be a bit like just get in touch with people and then like they'll have a phone call and you work it out together. It's like no, no, no. You need to go with the answers, like straight up, so that people can pick that up and kind of either decide it's for them or not. And obviously, you know, be targeted with it. So don't just blanket email people. Um, you know, don't spam people on LinkedIn. Like that's not cool either. I was sort of writing something the other day about that, and just for the saying that, like, if you can, you know, if you need to find someone's email, by all means use LinkedIn as a kind of like, hi, I'd love to send you a story on this, and could I grab your email? But then most people will probably reply to that so they can get the info from you. But in terms of just sitting there all day, just emailing people hoping to get stuff is like, it's not a good idea. I think that being targeted is always best. So once you've done the work around your story, it's just working out where you would expect people to read about that, and then do the research there as well around publications, and journalists that have written the types of stories that kind of cross over. So you can see this is not like an easy, simple process necessarily, but it takes time, and the results do pay off, because when I put 2 months of work into a show, I had 5 results over 2 weeks, and the listeners went up by 500% that week, which was absolutely insane. So when you can then bring it all together, you know, you can really feel the results of it. But it doesn't feel as easy as doing social media for yourself, or maybe setting up a newsletter. It is slightly more nuanced than that, for sure.
It sounds like you had some incredible results that you just breezed through, by the way. So I want to kind of go back and dissect that a little bit. So the point of the story is that there was a lot of work up front,
Yes.
and then you see the payoff, you know, after
Yeah.
that, or there's
Yes.
a delayed time to that work. It's not like a social media post where you make a post and you get some traction and you see a couple downloads and you make, you know,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily something like that. So what can you, with as much detail as you're willing and can you share like what that timeline or like how that worked? Like, you know, so we started working on it here, and then, you know, we got this happened and this, just so that people can kind of, I think it's so vague and nebulous to people that maybe they can start to crystallize like how these things
Yeah.
actually might happen.
Of course. I mean, I can tell you about my process when I take a project on, if that's helpful. But I
Yeah.
tend to work 6 weeks out roughly. But bearing in mind, I know how to do this. So maybe you need, if you're learning for the first time, you want to go 3 months out. And my first sort of kickoff thing is really like a strategy workshop to find out, you know, get all that information about why this podcast is being made, who it's for, um, what the sort of key stories are going to be coming out of it, what the host stories are. So just putting out all the detail of everything on one big sort of messy sort of sheet, however you do it. So then you can then start to sort of pull that into a strategy. So then I would go away and write a strategy for that, where I'd look at like key messages for the show. So I'd keep that down to like 3. So it could be something like to help business owners feel less overwhelmed with tech, because I'm just saying that because of someone I worked with recently. That's what they do, and as kind of specific as possible, because what you're doing then with the key messages is starting to work out how you can then achieve them through press. So then some people, I think you probably have target audiences when you take on clients, work and projects and stuff. So you've probably got an idea of who they are. But if you didn't, I would then start to think about that, because that would start to lead you to think about press. And then you probably then brainstorm some ideas around features, which are based on the workshop and tie into the key messages. Then
What is a
you know,
feature? What does that mean?
so a feature is I guess it's an interview really, or it's someone covering,
Right.
writing up your story like in a decent way, so that it's not just like a mention. It's a whole feature, a whole piece about you, a news piece about you.